Hello, everybody. Here we are on our next Q and A. This is number, I think, 231 or something like that. And here we go. Today's theme is familiarity, and the reason I chose that as a theme is I've been working on uh, the tonalization book. So it's sort of like what the one range is to the the other books, right? So the one range is to help you figure out what to do with the routine books. This book that I'm writing now is to help you figure out what to do with the tonalization study books. And we've talked about this stuff before. Uh, and I'm not going to go into detail right now unless you guys want to. But the main thing is that I wanted to point out today that almost all this stuff comes down to familiarity. Now, I don't mind if someone can give me a better word besides familiarity. I don't mind looking for that word. Um, but that's where I'm at right now. So, you know, my very first, now, when I say very first, the tonalization studies predate everything else I've ever come up with. I think the tonalization studies were written in 1983, 84, somewhere around there. Hello, Karen. Karen asks if you say we should do 20 tonalization studies with every routine, why are there less than 20 in some of the routine books? That's a good question. You know, those books, um, we want to do the the tonalization studies with beginners as well. And so I start the absolute beginners off with just 4 exercises. And that's good enough for them at that level. And then the Tyro level, there's 8 exercises. And it's not until you get to the player level that you start doing all 20 exercises. Um, and I actually have students. So that's the thing, right? The tonalization studies are sort of a separate uh, method. And that's why I'm writing about it now. It's sort of a separate method. You don't have to be doing all the other stuff in my other methods to take advantage of the tonalization studies. In fact, you don't even have to really be a trumpet player. So, yes, that's the answer to your question. In the new versions of the tonalization study books, I'm dividing the book into 3 parts. We have the expansion studies, we have the tonalization studies for that level. And then in the back of the book is all the tonalization studies, all 20 exercises, and all 12 keys. Oh, excuse me. But that's why it's less in those other books. Really, you should be doing out of the different books uh, when you're playing on the lower levels. Really should be. Um, and in order to do all 20 exercises. So, I think, see, the thing is that when I write the routine books, I want to write them in a way that someone doesn't need to dig deeper. If they don't want to dig deeper, they don't have to dig deeper. And that's where the other books come in. Uh, so I hope that makes sense. Mark says, "Hello, Eddie. Which of your books would you recommend for an absolute beginner?" Uh, I have a book called Trumpet Pioneer Tonalization Studies. And uh, for the absolute beginner, this is ideal. Out of all my books, that's the best one for the beginners. Now, it doesn't have any music in it. It's got exercises, scale exercises. But if you follow the instructions, and I was very careful to make the instructions in that book so that people could follow them as if they were taking lessons with me. So the text is just a little heavy because I wanted to cover all those bases. So if you were taking lessons with me, now we might not actually do that book. Some of the beginners do that book. Other beginners don't do that book, and I based that on the student. I have other materials that you know. I guess part of it is just my concern that someone who's only 6 or 7 years old um, might have trouble like sticking to that program. So yes, I do have other materials. Those materials are not published yet. They will be someday. But I ask how much time does a student spend practicing and stuff like that. Now I do have. Don't get me wrong. Oh, excuse me. I do have a very young student right now. I forget what age he is. I think he's first grade, maybe second grade. That is following my method, and I, for some reason, he doesn't have a problem. Maybe because his brother took lessons with me, and also his mother took lessons with me, and he doesn't have trouble doing what I say, right? And so with him, we did the uh, pioneer tonalization studies, trumpet pioneer tonalization studies, and he for he finished the book about a couple weeks ago. I actually believe because I have other materials that I teach, not just the scales, right? So he went through all my etudes very quickly, and he went through all my songs for that level very quickly, like more quickly than anybody I've seen at that age. I'm sorry to be yawning so much. That's an effect from the dialysis. I apologize for that. And anyway, so I think the reason why he's so far ahead for his age is because we stuck to that program in that tonalization book. And now he's doing the second level. Uh, Now that's not published quite yet. There is a Tyro level book, but it doesn't have all that introductory stuff in it. So one of the things I want to do this year is update the tonalization study books so that they have the introductory stuff, the expansion, and that stuff I was just telling Karen about at the end, where now you have for that level all 20 for all keys. So at this point, that doesn't exist at the Tyro level. And same thing for uh, the player level. That one doesn't have the expansion stuff on it either. Now you would only do the expansion stuff on the new keys for that level. So I think there's four expansion studies in the future Tyro book. All right, Karen says, with the cold weather, my fingertips are cracking. Any tips other than lots of lotion? It hurts to push the valves down sometimes. That's that's the connection to the trumpet. That's correct. Um, I would say that hydration is probably very important. Making sure that you're drinking enough. Uh, Anytime you have skin issues, that's always going to be my first go to is to talk about the hydration. Now, you pointed out, there is the lotion thing, and that hydrates us from the outside. I don't do it. I, I'm very reluctant to do any lotion. I think I'm going to have to uh, because of the dialysis stuff, because it does dry you out. That's the whole point, right? The whole idea is that they take water out of your system. So so yes, I might have to end up doing lotion. Hello, Seppo. Nice to see you. So yeah, that's one thing I would be very serious about is making sure you drink enough. Um, I think they say 2 liters a day. I actually had a student whose son, uh, well, I shouldn't actually be saying that out loud, even though it's not. I shouldn't actually say that. Anyway, all right. So we're talking about familiarity, and the main point I wanted to make is that it's all familiarity. Every single bit, even for the absolute beginners. And I think that's why the Trumpet Pioneer Tonalization Studies book works so well, is because you are maximizing the familiarity at that lowest level. So you're getting something that usually they wouldn't get at that stage. You're getting a level of familiarity in that book. Now, like I said, I can tell that a lot of students can't do that kind of regime because it's quote unquote too boring. And it is boring. it's, I, there's times sometimes when the students say, "Wow, Mr. Lewis, it's just so boring." I'm like, "You think that's boring? I've been doing these exercises since the 80s, and I've never stopped doing them. It's a lot more boring for me than it is for you. And here I am, for a lot of you, I have to do it in the lesson with you. Talk about boring. Of course, I'm joking around when I say that. But but yes, a lot of people uh, might have trouble sticking to the plan because of the repetition and just getting into the 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 routine aspect of it, doing it, sticking to the program all the way through. But the students that I've had that have stuck to the program, the level of familiarity that they have with those first notes is a wonderful foot in the door for them. But so the point I wanted to make today is that it's not just the scales. So you have familiarity with the chops. And that's not just for beginners, by the way. You have familiarity with what's going on here. That's why we need to practice, do things repetitively. We want to repeat them over and over again. We want to practice slow so that you become familiar with what's going on here. And it's not just the chops, it's not just the scales. Uh, Learning music. We use, in my lessons, Karen knows all about this, we use working backwards. And working backwards is a way to increase familiarity with the song. That's why we do the number of repetitions that we do. At each level, we do, uh, if we've got time, or if the piece is can justify that kind of time invested, we do 10 repetitions. Uh, and really, that 10 should be a minimum, depending on how difficult the music is. Karen says total tonalization has all 20 up to G, the player level. Is that the only one you have, or is that what you are working on? That's not the only one we have. So, like I said, the Pioneer book does have all of the keys, all the exercises, just up to this tuning note C. My plan is to update the Tyro book sometime this year, hopefully, God forbidding. God, God willing. Oh, I lost that word. Getting my references mixed up. So, God willing, I want to get the Tyro book finished, updated. It'll be like a second edition, so to speak. And that will have the expansion stuff and all 20 in all keys at the end. But you're right, the player book has all 20 in all keys. And we have now some of these are just digital. We have the apprentice book has all 20 at all keys. I think the pro has, and so does the master. I'm not so sure about the virtuoso one. I don't even know if the virtuoso one exists or not. I've got so many books I can't keep track of them. And that's a good thing, right? It's a very good thing. I know I've said this before. The books that I write, I have an aversion to wasted time. I despise wasted time, especially with the kind of repetition I put into the music, right? I despise wasted time. So I have this policy for myself. I will not write a book that's already out there. I will not write a book that somebody has already written. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. If you're Because there's a lot of guys out there. And I won't mention somebody's name, but there's a jazz guy that I used to work with who was I haven't read his book yet, but when I was with him, he was touting his book. This method, that method, this method. He's talking about the uniqueness of his method. And when I finally bought the book and read through it, I was extremely disappointed because it was just like all the other books out there. And so what I'm saying is for me personally, I can't stand to write books just to write a book. This book writing stuff is not an ego trip for me. I'm not just writing a book so I can say, oh, hey, I wrote a book. And I don't write dozens of books so that I can say, hey, I wrote dozens of books. Not that I haven't said that, but that's not why I do it. So, yeah, so uh, the, the books that I put out there, and I think I'm especially excited about the duet books because that's something everybody can use, even non-trumpet players. And so it makes me feel, when I'm when I'm publishing books like that, it makes me feel like I'm actually contributing to society. So, and what it's I think it's a lot easier when you're writing music to write stuff that's not out there, right? You write in If you write in a style that's true to you, you're going to be original. So, and I actually feel that way about my duet books. We've got 7 duet books now. Can you believe that? 7 duet books. You can call me Mr. Duet now. Anyway, and if I have, if things get done the way I want them to get done, there will be a lot more duet books coming. A lot more. All right. Karen says, oh, no, I already answered that. Seppo says, is there a reason for why the 20 studies or for trumpet is not available at the Tiger Music Store? No, I didn't know that. Um, Let me open it up and see what's going on there. Did I tell you guys ever the story behind that book? Because I didn't want to write it. In fact, that's in line with what I was just talking about right now. I didn't want to write that book. I wrote at the time I was taking lessons with Dick Schaefer. Today he goes by Richard Schaefer. He's lives in New York now. But he used to be second trumpet of the Houston Symphony, and I was taking lessons with him. And I was struggling. At the time, I wanted to be an orchestra trumpet player, believe it or not. And at the time, I, what am I saying? I was struggling with some of the etudes. For example, on Petrushka, Petrushka is the one that goes ba 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 ba, right? I could do it very well when I was practicing. I'm talking about the breathing, right? I could play the whole thing without having to take a breath. But what I discovered was that in the audition, when your heart's pounding, I couldn't go through the whole excerpt without taking a breath. Well, how do you practice that? How do you? Now you can do that thing where you do jumping jacks and get your heart running and then try to play it. And I do stuff like that, right? And I did back then. But I had this great idea, and it's still a great idea, that I would write a Petrushka etude that forces me to take a breath, right? So the Petrushka etude wrote, I think is 2 pages long. And the idea is to keep in tempo so that you have to take a catch breath. Take a really, really quick breath without interrupting the music. And so, yes, I had an etude for that. I had an etude for uh, the Shostakovich Piano Concerto, which there's a lot of trumpet solos in that concerto. But yes, I had a bunch of those etudes and I brought them into the lesson. And my teacher says, "Oh, you need to make a etude book out of this. You need to make an etude book." And by that time, I had 3 books. I had the physical trumpet pyramid, I had the daily routines, and I had I believe I had Go with the Flow at that point. And he said, "Oh, you got to write this. You got to make more of these." And every time I saw him, he says, "How's that book coming? How's that book coming?" And oh my. So I reluctantly sat down and wrote more etudes. and I tried to make them fit my system, right, with the the levels, right? So and so by the way, so does the the flow study book. Go with the flow. Go with the flow also has three A2s for every level. Um, Now I didn't put them in order on the A2 book. I didn't want to write that book. I didn't want to. I I hope that that doesn't come out in the music itself, right? Because that would be, I don't know. But yes, I was very, very reluctant. I'm glad that people like it. That book never stopped selling. It's not one of our top sellers, but it never stopped selling. Mark says, just ordered your book from Tiger Music. Thanks. Well, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for choosing Tiger Music too. Um, yeah, thank you very much. Karen says, is there a difference between tonalization studies in the Chops Pro book versus the Trumpet Pro pentatonic tonalization studies book? Yes, there is. So the pentatonic tonalization studies are so entirely different that it won't fit in any of the Chops books. Because we skip notes, the pentatonic scale, like say, for example, the C pentatonic, leave out the fourth and seventh scale degrees. So the pentatonic scale is C, D, E, G, A, C. There is no way for that to match what I put inside those the Chops books or the daily routines or the Chops Express. There's no way to do that. Okay. So so yes, it is different. Now, um, I like that the pentatonic scales are fun to practice. A little bit more technically difficult than the major scales, which is good, right? We like when things get difficult so that we improve as a player. Um, and one of the other things I have somebody that's that wants to. Maybe I shouldn't say this yet. Let me just speak in more general terms. There's somebody that wants to help me with the mundane tasks of publishing. And what I'm hoping that this person will do with me is help me publish more of the tonalization studies. I would like by the end of the year to have at least 4 harmonic minor tonalization studies, the books for that. I would like to have at least 4, if not 5 or 6, tonalization study books with complete with the expansion studies, complete with the you know the. I guess that's all I'm saying because we don't introduce the harmonic minors until after you've learned all the majors. And anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up right now is because technically you should do you should learn the harmonic minor before you learn the pentatonic. The problem is we don't have those books yet. So Seppo says there is an etude named Waltzing with Jim. Jim in the 20 studies. Is there a story behind it? Yes. How can I do this without I don't mind. I don't mind telling that story. Uh, I won't say his last name. That way, if there's any search engines or anything like that, it doesn't come up. Because I've reached a place of forgiveness in my heart, and um, yeah, so I don't want to hurt him with my story, but I don't mind telling you about the story. So I tell you guys sometimes about my last teacher, Dick Schaefer. We mentioned him already, uh, who lives in New York. He wasn't actually my last teacher. I had half of a semester with one more teacher, somebody that I moved to Houston to study with. Um, I transplanted my family to Houston. Houston, for me as a person, Houston is a terrible place to live. I'm sorry, I said it. There it is. Houston's not a nice place to live. For all the things I need in my life, uh, it's not here. And I always tell people that Houston, I make enough money to stay and not enough money to leave. Right? So anyway, this guy was the last teacher I had, and we didn't get along. I find that amazing too because I've never had that in my whole life. I've never had that kind of animosity between me and another person in my whole life. And to be clear, I was almost desperate to learn from this man. Everybody told me, don't go back to him, don't go back to him. Things are not going to go well for you. Everybody warned me. And I went back anyway because I couldn't believe that anybody would be that hostile. And sure enough, now he told me, well, first of all, you know what? It's kind of funny, and I used to tell this story all the time. When he kicked me out of his studio, he told me that he's in his whole career as a teacher, he's only had two failures. I was the second of those two. And what's funny about that is because when I tell other people that used to be his students, there are several that said, "Well, they must have been the first." So that was an interesting revelation, right? Um, but yes, one of the things he told me was that because by the time I went back to him, I was established in Houston as a jazz player. Apparently, he's got a problem with that. And every time something was not right in the lesson, he said it was because I was a jazz player. So, and then at the last lesson, he told me, um, leave my studio, never come back. So I never came back. I'm not a crying kind of person, but that devastated me. And yes, I cried. And I tell people, right? You know, I was telling a student the other day. I have a student an adult student in Atlanta that um, I was telling him about uh, how my life, right? I've got so many things in my life that are just, pardon the word, sucky. And if I dwelled on that, I don't know where if I'd even be here today because there's enough material for me to dwell on to really think that I've got a terrible life. And I'm sure that's true with a lot of people. But the difference for me is I don't dwell on it. And I use this story as an example, right? Because when this guy told me to never come back, that could have been the end of my career. That could have been the end because the whole plan, my whole plan was to get that degree and be an orchestra player. And now I didn't have a degree, I didn't have the money or the means to go somewhere else to get the degree. I was stuck in Houston. Like I said, I made enough money to stay and not enough to leave. And so I was so upset. Like I said, I was devastated. And I got in the car and I just drove blindly. I just if I felt like turning this way or felt like turning that way, I just kept going. And at the end of about, I guess, about 2.5 hours of that, I found myself deep in the middle of a state forest. And I shut off the car and I put my head back. And yes, I was devastated. But you know what? I said to myself, and it was sort of like a prayer, but and I'm sure I was praying the whole time I was on the road. But I said to myself, life has dealt me a bad hand. Life has dealt me a bad hand. Today, right here in my car in the middle of the forest, I need to decide what I'm going to do. Am I going to fold that hand or am I going to play it? In other words, see, when I say I had, so I tell people when I tell this story, I say I had nothing. I was I was a nobody trumpet wise. I didn't even have most of my skills yet. As a trumpet player, I wasn't established yet. I was established as a gigging player in Houston, but getting established as a player, like someone who knew what I was doing, didn't happen for almost another 10 years. And the way people make a living in music is they somehow ride the coattails of some other power, whether it be traveling with a famous band or taking lessons with a famous teacher or graduating from a famous university. There's always this coattail thing. And I had none of that. I had nothing to start a career on except what God gave me. And so that day, I decided I would play that hand and I would do everything within my power to make this thing work. And that's where the book came from. That's where uh, I tried making recordings. Those recordings didn't survive because they weren't very good. But like I said, I at that point I was ready to do anything to make this work, and it worked. I'm so I'll never say that I was thankful that what happened with him. That's not the kind of thing you're thankful about. The Bible says be in all circumstances. Uh, I don't think the word is thankful, but you get the idea, right? And in all circumstances, be thankful to God for His wonderful stuff, right? I'm not saying it right today. Um, I'm grateful that things happened the way they did. I'm not grateful for what happened. Does that make sense? So, yes, there's things today that would not be things, books in existence that wouldn't be in existence. And like I said, remember, I don't just write books for my own pleasure, for my own ego. I write books because I know that the books are helping people. So anyway, that's the story. Oh, I didn't actually talk about the actual etude. So I took a solo that I recorded, one of those that I recorded, like I told you, we made recordings and the recordings ended up not going anywhere. But I made, I guess, about half a dozen recordings in the early 90s. And I took one of my improv solos on a blues and I changed all the rhythms and changed the style. And that etude in the book is is a jazz improvisation that got transcribed and turned into a classical etude. So I call it because it's in 3/4, right? So I put the word waltz in there and I called it Waltzing with Jim because it started off as a jazz improvisation and he has this aversion to jazz stuff. So um that's the story is I was sort of like turning that around, right, to make it something better. Anyway, yeah, that's the story for that etude. Karen says, I'm on our board, a band board, and am learning of some large egos out there in the music performance world. That's correct. Sorry that happened to you. You, she says, move to Virginia. Yeah, I would love to move. I would like to live in Virginia and a whole bunch of other places too, for that matter. Um, yeah, the music industry is full of egos, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people that think that I'm one of them. That's all right. Um, I do think I'm a nice guy. Uh, the people who don't like me are the people who got used to me being nice and then didn't like it when I didn't do what they wanted me to do. Most people who don't like me, um, it's because of that. They they got used to me because as a nice guy, I'll bend over backwards for you. I will. But if you tell me to do something that goes against my values, and see, that's why they think I'm not a nice guy. Because when you hold the line at your values, they get offended by that because who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? Do you think you're better than me? Right? So every time you hold the line at those values. See, they think that someone who's nice is just a pushover, and it's just not true. You can be nice and not be a pushover. You can do nice things for people because that's what you want to do. It doesn't make you a pushover. So yeah, um, so I like to think that I'm not one of those egos because of the way I live my life. But there are probably a lot of people who think that of me. So, yeah. We all have hard lives. Um, there's a book I read. I try to make myself read books I don't like. Um, what do I mean by that? I don't mean the the books. How am I saying this? Um, like not genre, not plot. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like uh, era. So like books from 100 years ago are very difficult for me to read. So I made myself read a book called, I think it's called Main Street. Let me, Sinclair Lewis or Lewis Sinclair, I think. Yes, that's correct. I read Main Street. And there was an interesting quote towards the back of the book where they said, um, and I'm not going to try to quote it exactly. He says that there's very few things people, very few insults people will uh, to, tolerate more, or not tolerate. I'm sorry, got it backwards. Very few insults that people will not tolerate more than the assertion that you've known no trouble. Right? Very few things. There are very few people in this world who have not known trouble. We're all in the same boat in that regard. We're all in the same boat. We've all known at least some sort of trouble in our lifetime. And it's what we do with that trouble that makes the difference. Seppo says, concerning my earlier message, I would be eager to take lessons from my colleagues, but somehow it feels inappropriate, like questioning my own skills or even colleague skills. Do you have tips on how to deal with this feeling? Um, you know, I think you have to be careful with that sort of thing. Don't just take lessons with anybody. Um, I don't do this, right? I don't do what I've seen other people do. So, and I'm not saying this is the same thing. I'm saying that there's people who are not trustworthy. Okay. So I've seen, and I've seen it locally and I've also seen it nationally. I've seen people take lessons because they were having shop problems. And the teacher they signed up with advertised it all over the world. Why? Because the person is kind of halfway famous, and now he can go around telling people, hey, so and so is my student. Well, you're basically telling everybody that so and so has chalk problems. And I find that extremely unethical. I find it to be extremely unethical. I'm sorry. Even if the guy is okay with it, I find it to be unethical. I have taught different degrees of successful players in my lifetime. And that doesn't even include people who um, benefited from the books and told me later. People who are halfway famous, right? Told me afterwards that what they've accomplished wouldn't have been possible without my books. I've had that. I won't tell you who they are because I think it's unethical to do so. And so, um, taking lessons with your peers is sort of a it makes you vulnerable, right? It makes you vulnerable to that sort of thing. So I would be very clear uh, to 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 go to them and say, "Hey, I I find it interesting what you have to say. I would like to take lessons with you, but I want it to be discreet." Tell them that up front. Unless, of course, the person is famous and you want and you want people to know, "Hey, I'm taking lessons with this famous guy." Um, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not famous, and uh, I would never do that to one of my students. Never. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the famous people take lessons with me because they know they can trust me. So now I know I've recognized from the beginning that just talking about this stuff this way could look like I'm making it all up. I don't care. You guys know me well enough now to know that's not the kind of person I am. And see, that's the thing is I don't need that. You know, we've talked a little bit about advertising on this Q and A, right? I think especially 2 weeks back or two videos back, um, because a lot of advertising is just by its very nature unethical and immoral. We accept it because that's just the way everything in this world operates. But me as a Christian, I can't do that. I've told you guys this before. I can't do the things I know how to. I've read all the books. I've watched the interviews. I've watched the master classes or whatever that they talk about how to do this stuff. I know how to do it. And certainly, if you are that kind of person that has no moral or ethical backbone, go ahead and if you've got someone taking lessons with you, advertise it around the world. Go ahead. But for me, the best advertising I can do is for you guys to be successful. That is the best advertising. And so, and if someone wants to, how is that possible, right? Um, if I say I'm not going to take credit for someone else, some famous guy or some successful person, I'm not going to take the credit, but you're free to give credit, right? You're free to give credit. That doesn't change anything. And isn't that the way it should be? So I don't want, I told you guys in that other video, the one that I did about the hierarchy of support, right? I told you guys, you know, I don't want you to uh, leave comments that are untrue. If you haven't had success with my method, don't say you did, right? Seppo says this is mainly about the different profiles of the colleagues. People do know other different things just better, right? That's exactly right. Getting help just seems to get more difficult when on career. That's correct. That's correct. So, I just, to me, if you can get somebody to agree to be discreet, I think that makes a big difference. If you can get them to be discreet, don't tell them. And in fact, you could say stuff like, maybe not call it a lesson. Maybe I can come over to your place and we can play duets and you can tell me what it is that you think I should do. You know, there are ways to do that and be discreet about it. You know, but yes, I just don't like the idea of making myself vulnerable because I used to do that, right? I used to be vulnerable to these people that would um, take advantage of me. And so, yes. Now, uh, me personally, I don't take lessons anymore. Uh, there's a part of me that wish I would continue with lessons, but I'm so deeply wrapped up in my own thing that I would have a problem. The last lesson I took was in the early 90s. I took a lesson with Armando Guitarra. And if you don't know who he is, he's a famous trumpet player. He used to be, I think, principal trumpet of the Boston Symphony or the Boston Pops or something like that. Great player. He was the teacher of Chase. Uh, I forget his full name, but anyway, that's what he's as a teacher. That's what he was famous for. Besides just having a lot of successful orchestra students. Um, he's also famous for being the one to discover the Hummel trumpet concerto. Until he found it, it was collecting dust in a file cabinet or something somewhere. So that's another thing he was famous for. And that was the last lesson I took. Um, in that lesson, he told me, he says, "You obviously don't have any chop problems. Why are you here?" Right? So, and maybe that's why I never, to have him tell me that, I don't know. Maybe that's why I never took lessons again. Maybe it was just a bad taste in my mouth from that last teacher, the the last long-term teacher. So I don't count when I say who my teachers were. I don't count single lessons as someone who's my teacher, right? Um, so one-off lessons are not included when I say that. Other people might, but that's the thing, that's the ego thing. Why would they say, "Oh, so and so is my teacher," when they only had one lesson? I'm gonna bet probably because they want you to say, "Oh, you were a student of so and so." Once again, it's that ego thing uh, all over again. So, and I think my whole life has been shaped by this, what I'm telling you about, right? With the background, and it made me a better person. It all made me a better player. Not a better player, better person, all of it. So, anyway, we have time for one more, and then I have to get going. Uh, I am recording again. I don't have the kind of time I used to, but I am recording. All the stuff is set up. Seppo says, as a teacher, should we prepare our students for being ready? Like there will be a moment when you have to get along by yourself. Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I don't like when a student just quits without telling you first. And I understand why they do that, right? Because there are people that are afraid of confrontation, and they think something's gonna happen if they say, "Hey, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna be able to do lessons anymore. I think we've got two more left," right? Um, I think there are people that are afraid to do that, but um, I actually prefer that because it helps me help them to make that transition to where I'm not there, to walk them through all that stuff. So the biggest thing to me, I want my students to be able to practice. I want them to know how to practice. So we do a lot of practicing in the lessons. We do a lot of practicing in the lessons. I tell people, learning how to play trumpet, when you compare it to other stuff, is relatively easy. Learning how to practice is a lifelong pursuit. And so, like, for example, just as a quick example, I teach my students the age old, hundreds year, 200-year-old technique called working backwards. Other people call it different names, but I teach my students that technique. The problem with just teaching them the technique is that there's so many situations where you can't just follow that technique. And so if we practice in the lesson together, they see what those situations are. And just to give you one example, I don't like starting on a high note. I never liked that. I believe starting on a high note in the middle of your practice session can bruise you, and it can cause you to tense up where you shouldn't tense, the extra body tension, the body tension you don't want. Uh, I'm not afraid to talk about body tension just because I say that that's not the answer for everything. But I will tell you what causes body tension. And yes, it is a problem. And that's one of those things that causes body tension if you're going to repeat it 10 times and you're above the staff and you have to do that 10 times, that's going to do all kinds of weird stuff to you. So I like to work up to that higher section. Now, if that's how it is, let's say you're working on the concerto and there's 8 bars rest and then it starts there. Well, then you got to do that. There's no way getting around that. But you don't have to do that every time a high note comes up. And there's a lot of times when you're working backwards that you get to that spot and the note that makes sense to start on is the high note. Well, you can't. I don't want my students to do that. And that's just, I'm losing my voice again. That's just one example of the kind of, I call it wisdom, right? If you just blindly follow the the working backwards method without thinking about what it is you're doing, you can cause more problems than what you would save by doing working backwards. So yes, I think learning how to practice is an art that takes a whole lifetime to master because of these exceptions, because of the exceptions. So yes, it takes time to learn different practice techniques. Yes, it takes time to perfect those techniques, but the thing that takes the most time is acquiring that wisdom. We have the same thing for the tonalization studies since we've been talking about it. Um, how you handle the mistakes in the tonalization studies is a very specific way. I write about it in the back of the Trumpet Chops books. Hello, dear gamer. Aha, nice to see you. We're about finished here. All right. So anyway, thanks for everybody for hanging out again. I know this was quite a bit different this time, and we didn't really talk about uh, familiarity like I was thinking. It's just something on my mind right now because I'm writing that book. I think you guys are going to like the tonalization book when it comes out. So I don't know how long it's going to take me. I'm in the editing phase right now, but it's the first editing phase. I like to do a lot of editing to make sure that the book says what I wanted to say. You know how I am with the compositions. I think I told you this before. When I compose, I don't move on to the next stage of the composition until I am 100% satisfied with this stage. So, for example, I'm writing again, by the way. I write now at the dialysis center. I've got it set up now. I've got Dorico on my laptop and I write while I'm there. Um, so today, there was a piece that I worked on that already had the first melody, the A theme, and already had the harmony in the second trumpet, and already had the uh, what do you call it? The tuba part. It's a brass quintet, and so. And by the way, Seppo, uh, I'm only writing this piece now just to get back into it. I will be working on the credo again uh, pretty soon. Now that I'm back into it. So anyway, um, so for each one of those stages, when I didn't move on from the melody until I was 100% satisfied with the melody. I didn't move on from the tuba part until I was 100% satisfied with the tuba part and how it fit the melody. I never go back. Then I added the second trumpet part. I did not. So, what do I mean by never go back? I make whatever new thing I add fit what I already decided was correct. You can open a whole can of worms when you're composing by saying, so let's say, for example, I wrote the tuba part, uh, wrote the trumpet part first, the tuba part, and then when I was writing the second trumpet part, I decided, well, maybe that's not the right tuba part, so I go back to the tuba part and I change some of the notes. And when I did that, I thought, well, maybe that first trumpet part's not right, and I changed some of those notes. No, 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 no. Never go back. When you write, don't go to the next stage until you are 100% satisfied with what you already did. That's how I do it. And it's the same thing with the books. Um, I edit until I want it to be exactly right. You know, when I was younger, I would finish pieces and publish them, thinking, boy, this is terrible. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that. When I finish a piece, it sounds good to me. And some people would think that's arrogant, but that's how I write. That's how I write. I I put something on the screen, and if it sounds good to me, it's finished. Then I go to the next stage of the process. Okay? All right. Mr. Gamer says, what do you think about changing my mouthpiece from a Bach 3C that I got 10 years ago when I stopped playing to now another one? One that suits me better for where I am after beginning once again after that 10-year break. I don't like to mess with mouthpieces like that. Uh, I when you switch mouthpieces, it should always be very slow and deliberate. And so now, whenever someone asks me that question, I always have the same response. All physical work should be done for musical reasons. So, what is your musical reason for changing the mouthpiece? What is the musical reason? Not a physical reason. Not because I think my chops need a smaller mouthpiece, not because nothing like that. What is your musical reason? And if you don't have a clear musical reason, then I say don't change. If you have a terrible sound, maybe, because that's a musical reason. He says also it is also a kind of familiarity, right? That's correct. So, if the reason is a better sound, then it's time to experiment. But like I said, you don't. The experimenting should be slow motion, and I would find some place that you can go to where you can try mouthpieces. Okay. Anyway, thanks everybody. I gotta go. Um, Nice hanging out with you. God bless you. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.